event takes place celebrating culture, history, music and more. I'm here to find out and ask whether Black Lives Matter is a hashtag or a lifestyle.
Obvious, it's a lifestyle. We're an Afro-punk, you know. But I think to the majority of folks right now, because it's trending, that's what everyone's paying attention to.
Black lives always matter. Even before 2014, things were happening way before that.
They've made it realistic. Now we know what's going on, but I don't like their views. I don't like the views. It's a little extra.
Do we want acceptance, or do we want to just be like, yo, we want respect?
That we could go on and hours and hours about this topic, but just a general statement: we are the world. We have created the culture from jump, you know. So like, it's not a hashtag.
Muslims and African Americans and Latinos and gays and all of us will dump Trump, and he will never, ever, ever sit in the halls of the White House. Never. So vote.
So where do we go from here? There are many who are now worried what the future holds for the US and for the world all over. And despite early signs that Trump would backtrack on electoral promises, it seems he's still committed to some of his most controversial policies, sparking protests across the country. When asked what he would do about the issue of racially motivated violence, Trump allegedly said, if Black Lives Matter, then go back to Africa. We'll see how much they matter there, prompting a furious reaction online. There are many questions of authority on Black Lives Matter. So is this a movement, or is this people just jumping on a bandwagon? So when wanting to find out more about a subject, I do what every journalist does, research. So if you actually go into Google, you'll see that Black Lives Matter is defined as an activist movement in the United States that began in the wake of the July 2013 shooting of Trayvon Martin, who was an African-American teen and shot by a white cop, George Zimmerman. So Black Lives Matter actually campaigns against police brutality in the United States. There's another question that asks, is Black Lives Matter an organisation? So Black Lives Matter is a chapter-based national organisation working for the validity of Black life. We are working to rebuild the Black liberation movement. It's more than just a hashtag for people. These are people's lives, and the more that these things are coming out in the headlines, the more that there's a huge worry about it and affecting essentially everyone, whether you're Black or not. To find out more about this issue, I've arranged to speak with a self-professed civil rights baby, Regina Mead. She's been involved with the Black racial involvement since the 60s and shares her views on the differences from then to now. So Regina, tell me about your organisation, Sister to Sister. What are the main aims of it, and how does it tie in with the issue of Black Lives Matter?
Sisters to Sisters is focusing on empowering young women of color to take a serious look about the beauty paradigms that they are producing in mass subliminally, which says if you're dark, you're not beautiful. If your nose is wide, you're not beautiful. If your skin is not light, you're not beautiful. And so you've got a lot of the young women and the sisters wearing their hair naturally like I am now, whereas before 20 years ago, I couldn't get a job with natural hair. I wore braids, and I got rebuked by the head of my division. So Black Lives Matter has been an excellent conduit for voicing our displeasure in the mainstream system. Doing is what the civil rights movement did back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It's escalating this crisis to a national level, and the majority doesn't feel comfortable with seeing these Black faces and these Black murders, saying if we listened to the police, this wouldn't happen. No, it would happen. It's been happening. As a matter of fact, police were part of the problem during the Klan era. The chief of police was usually part of the Klan.
Now, if you ask me who's been killed by the police, I could list a countless number of men. Do you think Black Lives Matter excludes Black women?
Because systemically, they are murdered more than Black females. Okay? And that all goes back to slavery. The Black female was able to protect her family if she was the master's favorite, then she could step in to save her man. Sometimes they weren't permitted to marry. He was never permitted to stand up for his family. He was murdered. And so with Black Lives Matter is focusing on the fact that that is still happening and that something needs to be done to escalate the situation by shining a light on the fact that black men are being systemically murdered. They're not being lynched. They're being like they were 30 years ago. The new lynching is the gun.
This documentary asked the question as to whether Black Lives Matter is a hashtag or a lifestyle. Is it something that people are speaking about on the net, or is it a repeat of the civil rights movement?
I'm woke, as you say in the slang here in America. I come from an era where blacks could not drink at the same fountains as white people. I come from an era where they called my grandmother in the South girl. I mean, I stood up and I said something. My grandmother had to put her hand over my mouth. And so I've seen so much in the life that I've lived here in America. You know, this is my country. I am an American, but we have systemic problems. But the civil rights movement now is the Black Lives Matter. And because of the advent of social media, we are seeing the proliferation of what is occurring in our country being emulated by South Africans and Israelis. But they're using something powerful. We had speeches, we had marches. Now they're using social media. And that is the beauty of this. They're not violent. You know, I have friends that say to me, well, Regina, we need to go back to what Martin Luther King was doing. He was peaceful. I said, well, this is peaceful. I said, well, what you don't understand is the civil rights movement wasn't peaceful back in the 60s. Go back and look at the old movies where they were unleashing dogs and water cannons on peaceful march and burning buses with people in them. That wasn't peaceful. That was murder.
America's just elected its newest president. What does the future hold for this movement?
Well, I'll tell you a quick story. I was at a UN-sponsored event about 2.5 years ago, and I spoke to Bill Clinton's ex-head of staff, and I said, listen, this country is being torn apart by hatred. Your candidate needs to bring healing because there's too much hatred in this country. And she looked at me and she said, well, I'm going to let them know. Well, when Black Lives Matter group went to talk to her, she shut them down. Her husband's administration is the reason why the black community is so decimated because of the minimum term limits for first-time drug offenders, decimated the African-American middle class. And so instead of them taking this head on and saying, I'm sorry, this is what we did, Black Lives Matter, let's have it, she distanced herself from it. What has happened as a result of these recent murders of these young Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin is they've gone to the UN. These mothers have gone before the UN and said, you need to indict the United States for crimes against humanity. All of a sudden, you look at the United States and realize, what hypocrisy. You know, I think there's been a great first step, and I say this all the time. The chief of police came out recently and apologized for what the police departments have been doing, have been complicit in the murder of black males and the black community. And he said, we have to work on it. So that's the first step. This is a struggle that all people of color have to continue in order to be viewed as human beings, as equals. I refuse to hate. I have every reason to hate because I have seen horrific things done here in my country and abroad. But I refuse to hate because then I'm no better than they are.
Such a strong message from Regina. In such divided times, it's so important to remember not to let hate blind our judgment. This is definitely one of those hot topics that's not dying down anytime soon. From New York City to London, I've spoken to young, passionate activists. I've even spoken to a civil rights baby who are so on fire for this hashtag. They see it more than just words that you type into Twitter. It's a lifestyle, it's an injustice, it's in the headlines, it is a repeat of history, and it's something that needs to be stopped. From Malcolm X to Martin Luther King, the history of the civil rights movement is alive and well in modern America. With the Trump presidency, it seems like that dream is still just out of grasp. But that doesn't mean that we should stop fighting for a better world for all. It doesn't mean we should give up hope for a better future. Whether you're black or white, injustice is still injustice.
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
If you like this program, please be sure to support this channel and do follow me on my blog for more stories and thoughts.